The sun over Red Hollow was hard and white, flattening the color out of everything. Dust hung in the air, drifting slow over the main road. It was the kind of day when even the dogs didn't bark. Elias Ward rode in at noon. His horse was thin and quiet, its coat streaked with sweat. Elias sat straight in the saddle, one hand loose on the reins, the other resting near the worn handle of his revolver. He looked like a man used to being watched and not liking it much. He passed the blacksmith's forge, the general store, the boarded-up barber shop. Faces appeared behind windows, then vanished. A few men on the porch of the feed store followed him with their eyes, saying nothing. Red Hollow wasn't the kind of town that asked questions out loud. When he reached the saloon, the Amber Lantern, he tied his horse to the post and stood there for a moment, taking in the sound of a piano through the open door. The music was slow, lazy, worn out from being played too often. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco and old wood. Light from the front windows cut narrow strips across the floor. A few men sat at tables, half asleep over whiskey glasses. Behind the piano, a woman sang, low voice, calm, like she wasn't trying to impress anyone. Elias walked to the bar. His boots left dry prints on the floorboards. The bartender, a gray-haired woman with her sleeves rolled up, looked at him. "Whiskey?" she asked. He shook his head. "Coffee." That made her raise an eyebrow. "This early in the day?" He didn't smile. "Never too early." The woman poured black coffee from a dented pot. He took it, sipped, and winced a little at the taste. Bitter. Burnt. But it was hot, and that was enough. Across the room, the piano stopped for a moment. The singer, Clara Monroe, looked over. Her eyes were sharp even in the dim light. Auburn hair pulled loose around her shoulders, dark dress fitted tight at the waist, corset laced but not perfect. She was beautiful but not in a polished way. She looked tired but steady. When the piano player started again, her voice followed, softer this time, like she was thinking about something else. Elias leaned on the counter, not watching her directly, but aware of her presence in the room. The sound of her voice settled something in him, not peace exactly but a pause. He'd been riding too long, sleeping rough, always waiting for something behind him to catch up. For a few minutes he let that tension ease. The door swung open. 3 cowhands stumbled in, loud and half-drunk. They went straight to a corner table, slapping cards down, kicking a chair out of the way. Clara's song faltered for a moment. The bartender sighed and went to quiet them, but before she could, one of the men shouted toward the stage. "Sing something worth listening to, sweetheart." The piano stopped. The room went still. Elias watched without moving. He'd seen scenes like this in too many towns, bored men looking for trouble, a crowd pretending not to see. Clara met the man's eyes, her expression cold. "Pay for a request," she said, "or keep your mouth shut." The man laughed, stood up, and took a few steps toward her. "That any way to talk to customers?" Elias set his cup down. He didn't think much about it, it was just instinct. He stood, crossed the floor, and positioned himself between the drunk and the stage. The man stopped, confused. Elias's voice was calm. "You heard the lady. Sit down." The man grinned. "You her husband?" "No." Elias's tone stayed level. "Just someone who likes quiet." The man's hand twitched toward his belt. That was enough. Elias moved fast, faster than anyone expected. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and forced him back against the table. The other 2 stood halfway up, then thought better of it. Elias held the man's arm until he stopped fighting, then released him. "Sit. Finish your drink. Don't talk again." For a few seconds nobody said anything. Then Clara spoke softly. "Let him go. He's not worth it." Elias nodded once and stepped back. The drunk sat down, rubbing his wrist. The bartender went back behind the counter, pretending not to have seen anything. Elias picked up his coffee again, drained what was left, and set a coin on the bar. The music started once more, slow, measured, like the tension in the room hadn't quite gone away. Before leaving, he looked at Clara. She met his gaze for a second, just long enough to see that he wasn't like the others. Quiet, yes, but dangerous in a controlled way. He tipped his hat slightly and walked out. The door closed behind him, and the noise in the saloon slowly came back. Clara kept singing, but her mind wasn't on the song anymore. When the last man left and the lamps burned low, she stood by the counter with the bartender, May Tucker, who was counting coins. "He said he came for coffee," Clara said quietly. May smiled without looking up. "Nobody comes to this place for coffee, honey." Outside the night was still. Down the street, Elias walked toward the small room above the blacksmith's shop. He didn't look back. He knew better than to stay anywhere too long. But as he climbed the narrow stairs, The sound of Clara's voice still played in his head, steady as a heartbeat he couldn't shake. He told himself he'd ride out at sunrise. Just one night in Red Hollow. Just coffee. Nothing more. But he already knew that wasn't true. The afternoon sun hung low over Dry Creek, turning the dirt road into a path of gold and heat. The saloon doors creaked open, and every conversation inside dropped to a low murmur. The man from the morning, broad-shouldered, dark coat, a revolver hanging low on his hip, walked in like he'd been there before, though no one had ever seen him. Dust clung to his boots. His eyes scanned the room once, sharp but calm, as if measuring who might reach for a gun. The piano stopped mid-tune. Only the clinking of glasses broke the silence. He moved toward the counter, his steps slow, deliberate. The bartender, a gray-haired man named Earl, wiped the same spot on the counter he'd been cleaning for 10 years. "You looking for someone?" he asked, voice tight. The stranger didn't answer at first. He set down a small coin and said quietly, "Coffee." Earl blinked, then poured. "You sure you're in the right place for that?" "I ain't here for whiskey," the man replied. His tone was even, but his eyes kept drifting to the staircase at the back of the room, where the saloon singer had just appeared. Clara descended one step at a time, holding the banister lightly. Her dress, deep burgundy, corseted at the waist, caught the light in a way that made every man look twice. But her gaze went only to him. She didn't smile. Her lips parted, slightly tense, as though she recognized him and didn't know whether to run or speak. "Didn't think I'd see you again," she said quietly when she reached the floor. He didn't turn right away. He took a sip of coffee, then looked at her. "Didn't think I'd come back." The room seemed to listen. Earl stepped away, pretending to polish bottles. Clara moved closer, her heels clicking softly. Her voice was low enough that only he could hear. "You shouldn't have. Sheriff's been asking questions. Folks think you're the one who—" He interrupted, quiet but firm. "I didn't kill him." She studied his face. There was no lie in it, but also no comfort. "Then why come back?" He looked at her hand resting on the counter, delicate, trembling slightly. "Because there's something here that don't let me sleep." Her eyes flickered with something between fear and longing. "You mean someone?" she said. He didn't deny it. The sound of spurs cut through the moment. The saloon doors swung again and Sheriff Danton stepped in, his badge shining dull in the light. He was a heavy man with a permanent scowl, his eyes immediately locking onto the stranger. "Well, I'll be damned," Danton said. "Look what the desert dragged back." The stranger turned slowly, his hand never straying far from his holster. Clara's heart raced, she felt it in her throat. The saloon fell silent again. "Didn't come looking for trouble," the man said. Danton smirked. "You always say that before trouble starts." He took a few steps closer, stopping just a few feet away. "You got a name this time?" "Elias," the stranger said finally. "Elias Cross." The sheriff gave a short laugh. "That's supposed to mean something?" "To some people," Elias answered. His eyes drifted past the sheriff toward Clara just for a second, but it was enough. Danton caught it. The tension thickened. Clara felt a cold rush under her skin, knowing what that look meant. Danton stepped closer to her, almost protective. "You stay away from her," he growled. "Last thing this town needs is more ghosts." Elias's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He finished his coffee in one slow motion, dropped a coin on the counter and turned for the door. "Don't go far," Danton called after him. "We might have more to talk about." Elias stopped in the doorway. Without turning back, he said, "Then you know where to find me." He walked out into the bright afternoon, leaving behind silence and the weight of something unfinished. Clara's hand was still on the counter, trembling slightly. She looked at the empty cup he'd left and whispered under her breath, "You always come back when you shouldn't." Outside, Elias squinted into the light, the town stretching before him like a place caught between peace and violence. He adjusted his hat, checked the horizon and started walking, one hand on his gun, the other brushing against the small folded letter inside his coat. The one written in Clara's handwriting months ago that simply said, "Come back." Just once. He didn't know if coming back would save him or destroy him. But he knew he couldn't stay away. The air outside the saloon was dry and heavy. Elias walked down the main street of Dry Creek, the sun sinking behind the hills and stretching the shadows long across the dirt. His boots made slow, steady sounds on the ground, measured, deliberate. He wasn't trying to look calm, he was calm. Years of tracking, fighting, and hiding had carved it into him. But his instincts hadn't dulled. Every time he passed a corner or an alleyway, his eyes flicked that way. He felt the weight of looks on his back, Men watching from porches, women pulling their children inside. The sheriff had made sure everyone knew who he was. He stopped beside the livery stable, checked his horse's saddlebag, and made sure the revolver tucked inside his coat was loaded. His fingers moved fast and practiced. Then, from behind him, a faint crunch of gravel. He froze, hand hovering near his gun. "Easy," said a low voice. Elias turned halfway, his hand still near his holster. A man stepped out from behind a wagon. A deputy, no doubt, though he didn't wear a badge. The kid couldn't have been more than 20. Nervous. Sweat glistened on his forehead even in the cooling air. "Sheriff wants a word," the boy said. "Then he can come himself," Elias replied. The deputy hesitated, eyes darting to Elias's gun. "He said you'd say that." "Then you know what happens next," Elias said quietly. The boy swallowed hard, hand inching toward his belt, but he wasn't quick enough to look like a real threat. Elias stepped closer, close enough that the kid could see the steady calm in his eyes. "Go home," Elias said. "Tell your sheriff I don't start fights. But I don't run from him either." The deputy nodded shakily and stepped back. Elias turned away and kept walking. He felt no triumph, just that familiar, hollow edge that came after every confrontation. It was never fear he felt, not anymore. It was calculation, measuring who was desperate, who might follow, and how much time he had before the next gun came out of the dark. He reached the edge of town as the light faded completely. Crickets began to hum somewhere near the creek. He crossed the narrow bridge and followed the faint trail toward an old barn half hidden behind a cluster of cottonwoods. That was where the letter had told him to go. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open. Inside it was dim, moonlight seeping through cracks in the walls, dust hanging still in the air. He smelled hay and old wood. Then a voice from the shadows. "You came." Clara stepped out from behind a stack of crates, wearing a dark shawl over her dress. Her hair was loose now, falling around her shoulders. Without the saloon lights and the noise, she looked different, less guarded, more alive. Elias closed the door behind him. "You shouldn't be here." "I could say the same," she answered. They stood there in the quiet, the sound of their breathing filling the space. Clara looked down at her hands, then at him. "You didn't write back." "I was too close to being caught," he said. "Didn't think a letter was worth my neck." Her eyes hardened for a moment. "And yet you came back anyway." He hesitated. He wasn't used to explaining himself. "Didn't like the thought of someone else telling my story." "Your story?" she said, stepping closer. "Or ours?" He didn't answer. She stopped a foot away from him. The distance between them felt like something fragile. One step would break it and nothing would go back to how it was. Her hand brushed against his arm as she passed him, heading to the small table in the corner. There was a lantern there, dimly lit. She adjusted the flame, enough to throw a warm light across both of them. He noticed the tremble in her hands. She wasn't scared of him, but she was scared for him. "I heard what they said," she whispered. "They think you killed that rancher up north. They're ready to hang you if you give him half a reason." "I didn't kill him," Elias said. "But I was there." She looked up sharply. "Then who did?" He took a breath, weighing how much truth to give her. "A man named Pike. He rode with me once. Sheriff Danton knows it. But if Pike's free, that means someone's paying him to stay that way." Clara stared at him, realizing what he meant. "You think Danton's talking money?" "I don't think." "I know." She stepped closer again, voice trembling. "Then you're walking into a trap. He'll come for you tonight." Elias nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here. Needed to see you before I go." The words hit her harder than she expected. She reached up and touched his arm, fingers curling slightly against his sleeve. He didn't move away. For a long moment they just stood there, the sound of the wind through the cracks, the soft rasp of their breathing. Her voice dropped. "You don't have to leave." "I do," he said. "You know that." Her eyes searched his face, dust, scars, a life of running, and she knew he was right. Still she stayed close, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. "Then stay a little longer," she said. He didn't answer with words. His hand came up slowly, resting against the side of her neck. She didn't pull away. The silence stretched until the air between them felt charged, dangerous. Then she leaned in, just enough for her forehead to touch his. No one spoke. The moment held, real and human and quiet. Then from outside came the faint sound of horses. They froze. Elias's eyes snapped toward the door. "Go," she whispered. He stepped back, his calm returning in an instant. He checked his gun, adjusted his hat. "They found me faster than I thought." "Where will you go?" He glanced toward the back exit. Where I always go. Where they don't expect me. She caught his arm before he moved. Elias, if you make it through this, come back. He looked at her, then nodded once. If I can. Then he was gone, slipping out through the back, disappearing into the night as the sound of hooves drew closer. Clara stood there alone, her hands shaking now. Through the slits in the wood, she saw the glint of lanterns, men on horseback, searching. She blew out the lantern and stepped back into the darkness, her heart pounding. The night was silent again, but she knew the hunt had begun. The moon was high when Elias reached the edge of Red Hollow, his breath shallow and his legs heavy. The desert stretched wide ahead of him, flat, silent, broken only by dry brush and the distant hum of wind. Behind him, the town glowed faintly, orange from oil lamps and gunfire. He'd run that path 100 times in his head, but now every step felt slower than it should. His horse, Dusty, was tethered where he'd left her near the riverbed. She whinnied softly as he approached. "Easy, girl," he whispered, running his hand down her neck. His fingers trembled and he hated that they did. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the weight of knowing he was close to the end of something. Maybe his freedom, maybe his life. He climbed into the saddle just as the first shouts echoed from the ridge behind him. "Ward, drop the gun." Voices. 5, maybe 6 men. Lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the dark. He kicked his heels gently and the horse began to move. Slow at first, then faster. A rifle cracked, the sound sharp and dry. The bullet hit the dirt a few feet to his left, spraying sand against his boot. Elias turned the horse toward the canyon trail, knowing it was narrow and dangerous but better than being caught in the open. The wind cut at his face as he rode. Another shot, closer. He ducked low over the horse's neck, feeling the muscles strain beneath him. For a few seconds, it was only the sound of hooves and the wind, but then the rhythm broke. Another horse joined in, then 2 more. They were gaining. He knew the trail ahead, steep cliffs, dry creek bed, a bend that dropped into open desert. If he could reach the bend, he might lose them. But one mistake and he'd break his neck. He glanced back once. The riders were close now. He saw the glint of metal, the flash of a revolver. He whispered under his breath, half prayer, half habit, "Just a little more." When the trail turned sharply, he leaned into it, pulling the reins tight. Dusty's hooves skidded on loose rock, but she steadied herself. They made it around the curve, barely. Behind them, one of the pursuers wasn't so lucky. His horse stumbled, sending both of them down in a tangle. The others slowed for a moment. That moment was all Elias needed. He reached the bottom of the canyon and stopped behind a fallen boulder. Heart pounding, he slid from the saddle, drew his revolver and listened. Nothing but the wind. He crouched low, waiting. Sweat ran down the side of his face. Every sound in the dark felt louder than it was. The shifting of gravel, the slow breath of his horse, the faint metallic click as he adjusted the hammer on his gun. Then a voice from above. "He's down there. I see him." He aimed quickly and fired. The echo rolled through the canyon like thunder. A man cursed, then silence again. Elias didn't wait. He ran, leading Dusty by the reins toward the dry creek. The ground was uneven and every step jarred his knees. His lungs burned. He knew he couldn't outrun them forever. He needed a place to hide. He spotted a narrow gap in the rocks to the left, a small cave half covered by brush. He led Dusty inside and crouched, the horse trembling beside him. He checked his gun again. 2 rounds left. His mind ran fast, counting, planning, measuring. He could shoot 2, maybe scare off the rest, but if they had rifles he'd be cornered. He thought briefly about Clara. The way she'd touched his arm before he left, the look in her eyes. He didn't know if it was hope or fear. Probably both. Outside, hooves scraped on stone. The men were close now. He heard one dismount, boots crunching on the gravel. "Ward," a voice called. "You're done. Come out and we'll make it quick." Elias didn't move. The man laughed, low, mocking. "Ain't worth dying for a saloon girl, is she?" The words hit harder than Elias expected. Not because of the insult but because they knew. Someone had seen them together. He raised his gun slowly, aiming toward the sound. The man's boots shifted closer. Elias waited until he saw the faint outline of the figure against the canyon wall, then fired. The man dropped with a grunt. The others shouted, their lanterns swinging wildly. Elias ducked low and reloaded the 1 spare round he had left. The next bullet struck the rock near his head, sending stone chips flying. He pressed his back against the wall, jaw tight. He was cornered. Outnumbered. But if this was where it ended, he'd make it count. Then, faint but clear, a sound from the ridge above. A single rifle shot. One of the pursuers cried out and fell. Another shouted in panic. Elias frowned, confused. That wasn't his gun. He peeked out and saw a figure on the hill, small, barely visible, holding a rifle. A flash of red fabric in the wind. Claire. She reloaded quickly and fired again, forcing the riders to scatter. Elias used the distraction to mount Dusty and charge down the canyon. Bullets followed, but none found their mark. He didn't look back until the gunfire stopped. When he did, he saw her still standing there, rifle in hand, smoke rising from the barrel. For a moment he thought she was smiling, but the distance made it hard to tell. He turned back toward the desert, urging Dusty forward. His chest ached from exhaustion, but inside him there was something else, a quiet pull he hadn't felt in years. She'd risked everything for him. As the dawn started to break, Elias slowed his horse near a cluster of low rocks and dismounted. He wiped the sweat from his face and watched the horizon turn pale gold. His breathing steadied, but his thoughts didn't. He knew he couldn't stay away now. Somewhere behind him, Red Hollow waited, full of enemies, lies, and one woman who had just saved his life. And for the first time since the war, Elias Ward wanted to go back. The sun was already high by the time Elias rode back toward Red Hollow. The desert had gone still again. No wind, no sound except the slow rhythm of hooves on cracked earth. His coat was torn at the shoulder, and his left hand ached where the recoil had split the skin. He ignored it. The pain reminded him he was still alive. From a distance, the town looked the same, rows of wooden buildings, dust hanging in the air, a few wagons rolling slow down Main Street. But as he got closer, he saw something had shifted. People were standing in small groups, whispering. The sheriff's horse was tied outside the saloon. He stopped before reaching the main road, dismounted, and led Dusty into the shadow of an abandoned shed. He couldn't walk through town openly, not after what happened last night. He took a deep breath and felt the tightness in his chest, not from the chase but from what he knew he had to do next. Claire. She'd saved him. He still saw her up on that ridge, rifle steady, hair loose in the wind. No one had ever done that for him before. He didn't know what that meant, or what it was going to cost her. He waited until a wagon passed, then slipped behind it and moved along the edge of the street. The saloon looked quiet. No piano, no noise. Through the cracked shutters, he saw a few men inside, sheriff's deputies by the look of their hats. One of them was Jonas Pike, the young one who always watched too much and said too little. Elias stayed in the shadows, watching, measuring. He could go in through the back, same as before. But if they were questioning Clara, walking in armed would just make things worse. He took off his coat, slung it over his arm to cover the revolver, and moved down the alley. The back door was unlocked. That worried him. He stepped inside, keeping his steps light. The smell of stale beer and tobacco lingered in the air. The hallway was dim, lit only by a single lantern on a hook. He heard voices ahead, Sheriff Danton and Clara. "I already told you," Clara said, her tone sharp. "I heard shots same as everyone else. I don't know where he went." Danton's boots scuffed against the floor. "You expect me to believe that? You and that drifter been making eyes at each other since he rode in. You think I don't notice?" "I don't care what you notice," she said. "He came for coffee, that's all." Elias's jaw clenched. Even through the wall, he could hear the tremor under her words. Fear, not for herself but for him. Danton snorted. "You're a bad liar, Miss Monroe. Always been. And if I find out you helped him, I'll shut this place down so fast your songs won't save you." The sound of his boots moved toward the door. Elias stepped back out of sight. The sheriff came out into the alley, pausing for a moment to spit in the dirt before heading toward the jailhouse. When his steps faded, Elias slipped into the saloon. Clara was standing by the bar, her hands flat on the counter. Her hair was loose, her voice steady but low. When she looked up and saw him, her breath caught. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I had to see if you were all right." Her eyes softened for a second, then hardened again. "You think they won't hang you if they find you inside this place? Half the town saw you ride out." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And the other half saw you save me." She stared at him, her jaw tightening. "I had to. They'd have killed you." "Still could," he said. "If they figure it out." Silence stretched between them. The piano sat quiet in the corner, a few broken keys catching the light. Finally she said, "You need to leave tonight. Ride north through the pass before dawn. They'll search the south roads first." He nodded but didn't move. "And you?" "I'll handle the sheriff." He shook his head. "He already suspects you." "I can take care of myself," she said sharply, then lowered her voice. You think this is the first time I've had to lie to a man with a badge? Elias almost smiled, but there was too much weight in the moment. He reached out and brushed his thumb along her wrist, quick, almost hesitant. She didn't pull away. Her skin was warm, trembling slightly. You shouldn't have come back, she said softly. I couldn't stay gone. She looked up at him, then really looked, eyes searching his face for something she couldn't name. Her hand moved to his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. They'll hang you if they catch you, Elias. Maybe, he said quietly. But I won't run until I know you're safe. She exhaled, slow and shaky. You're stubborn. So are you. Their foreheads almost touched. For a second neither spoke. Outside, a horse snorted, and somewhere down the street a door slammed. Then she pulled away, breaking the moment. Go upstairs, she whispered. Use the back room. Rest while you can. I'll keep watch. He wanted to argue, but she was already moving toward the door, straightening her hair, adjusting her corset as if preparing for another performance. He watched her hand linger on the piano before she stepped out into the saloon. Her voice followed, calm, steady, pretending everything was normal. Elias waited a moment, then climbed the stairs. The hallway creaked under his boots. He found the back room, small, quiet, lit by a crack of sunlight through the shutters. He sat on the bed and exhaled, his body finally giving in to exhaustion. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to close his eyes without holding his gun. But sleep didn't come easy. His thoughts were a mess. Clara's voice, the sheriff's threats, the memory of gunfire echoing in the canyon. He'd survived worse, but this was different. Every choice now tied to her. Downstairs, faintly, her singing started again, low and slow, the kind of song that made the whole room go still. He sat there in the dark, listening, knowing he couldn't stay but already wishing he could. Outside the wind picked up again. And with it came the sound of hooves, too many to be chance. The saloon was almost empty when Clara returned that evening. Only two men sat near the window, arguing softly over a card game. The piano was silent. The air smelled of whiskey, wood smoke, and something faintly metallic, like rain on an old rifle barrel. She hesitated at the door, still shaken from what she had seen earlier that day, the stranger's face half lit by sunlight, eyes unreadable. Sheriff, outlaw, or something in between, she couldn't tell anymore. She walked slowly toward the bar. Her boots made dull thuds on the wooden floor. Inside her chest, her heart beat unevenly, steady for a few seconds, then too fast as if trying to keep up with her thoughts. Behind the counter, Joe wiped a glass with a rag that was more dust than cloth. He looked up when he saw her. You look pale, he said. Everything all right? She nodded. Just tired. But Joe wasn't convinced. He studied her for a moment, then poured a drink and slid it across. On the house, he said quietly. For nerves. She took it, though she barely drank half. The burn in her throat was grounding, something real, something that didn't lie. Through the swinging doors the wind picked up, carrying dust from the street inside. It was almost night. Outside a horse snorted. A boot scraped on gravel. Then silence. Clara turned toward the window. The stranger was standing there again. Not walking, not looking around, just standing in the middle of the street, coat collar up, hat low. The kind of stance that made people nervous without knowing why. Joe followed her gaze. That man again? He muttered. He's been around since morning. She didn't answer. Her pulse climbed. The man didn't move until she stepped toward the door. Then, as if reacting to her, he started walking, slow, steady, each footfall echoing like a clock. Clara stepped outside. The air was colder than before. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said. His voice was calm, even polite, but something in it carried a warning, like someone who knew what danger sounded like and didn't want to repeat it. Clara crossed her arms. You've been watching me all day. You planning to tell me why? He looked around first, scanning rooftops, the corners of the buildings. Only then did he step closer. There's a man coming through this town tonight. He's looking for me. You don't want to be outside when he gets here. Her throat tightened. You brought trouble here? I didn't have a choice. His voice was lower now, strained. But I'll deal with it. Something in the way he said it, quiet, certain, almost resigned, made her stop judging him for a second. Maybe he wasn't running. Maybe he was protecting someone. A horse neighed sharply in the distance, followed by the sound of a gate slamming open. The stranger's eyes narrowed toward the north end of town. They're early, he said under his breath. Clara's instinct told her to run back inside. But she stayed. Who's coming? He turned to her. Men who don't leave witnesses. Her stomach dropped. He pulled the revolver from his holster and checked the chamber. 6 bullets. Calm hands, no tremor. Whatever fear he had, he buried it deep. Then, to her surprise, he handed her a small Derringer pistol from his coat pocket. In case they find you first. She stared at it, unsure. The weight felt alien in her palm. Don't hesitate, he said. Hesitation gets people killed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind carried a faint echo of approaching hooves, slow, steady, inevitable. She looked into his face and saw exhaustion mixed with something human, regret maybe, or guilt. He wasn't just some outlaw passing through. He was a man cornered by his past. Go inside, he said quietly. She didn't move. He raised his eyes to her again, voice softer this time. Please. That word, please, broke her resistance. She stepped back toward the saloon door, watching as he turned toward the north road, revolver drawn, shoulders squared. Inside, the piano player had stopped pretending to tune. Joe stood frozen, glass in hand. What's happening? He asked. Clara's voice shook as she answered. Trouble's coming to town. Outside, thunder rolled, not from the sky but from horses and gunmetal. The stranger moved into the street, one man against the sound of many. And in that moment, Clara realized she wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of what would happen to him. The street was silent except for the low thump of approaching hooves. Lanterns hanging from wooden posts swung in the wind, throwing uneven light across the dirt road. Dust rose in thin spirals, drifting over the sheriff's office sign and the windows of the saloon. Clara stood just behind the saloon doors, her breath shallow, every muscle tight. Through the narrow gap between the swinging planks she could see him, the stranger, standing dead center in the street. His stance was steady, revolver in his right hand, the other resting on his belt. He didn't hide, didn't move. Just waited. The first riders appeared at the far end of town. 4 of them. Their coats long, their hats low. They moved like men who didn't expect resistance. One carried a rifle across his saddle. Another had a scar down his jaw that glinted when the lantern light hit it. Joe came up behind Clara and whispered, "Close the doors. Don't look." She didn't move. "He'll be alone out there." "That's his choice," Joe said. But his voice was quiet, less conviction than fear. The stranger lifted his head slightly when the riders stopped 20 yards away. Their leader, a heavy-set man with a thick mustache, swung down from his horse. "You run far, Carter," the man said. His voice carried down the street. "But you know how this ends." The stranger, Carter, didn't answer at first. He just looked at the ground for a moment, then back up. "You should have stayed off this road, Mason." Mason chuckled. "We ain't here to talk. You know what's owed." Carter's hand tightened on the revolver grip. "The debt was settled when you left those men to die." The words landed heavy. Clara saw Mason's smile fade. The tension spread like fire across the group. Then everything happened fast. A flash. A gunshot. The crack split the night open. One of the riders fell backward off his horse. The rest fired in return, bullets sparking against the blacksmith's wall. Horses screamed and bolted. Carter moved quick and deliberate, no wasted motion. He ducked behind a trough, fired twice. One man down. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Clara's hands trembled where she held the Derringer. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. She wanted to look away but couldn't. Joe grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back. "You can't help him." But she resisted. "I can't just hide." Carter reloaded behind cover, breathing hard. A bullet clipped his sleeve, tearing fabric but missing flesh. He gritted his teeth, scanned left. 3 left standing now. Mason barked orders, moving toward the general store for cover. Carter shifted position, firing toward the flicker of movement. He hit one in the leg. The man fell, dragging himself behind a barrel. Another rider circled around the saloon's side. Clara saw it first through the window reflection. "Behind him!" she shouted before thinking. The rider turned at her voice, saw her face through the door and aimed. Clara's body locked in place, she couldn't move, couldn't think. Then a gunshot from the street split the air. The rider dropped his weapon and fell sideways. Carter lowered his smoking revolver and looked straight toward her. Just for a moment their eyes met. A strange calm filled her chest, fear still there but mixed with relief. He'd heard her. He'd listened. Then Mason stepped out from the shadows with the rifle. Carter saw him too late. The blast threw him backward, hitting the dirt hard. Clara gasped. For a second, everything went quiet again except the ringing in her ears. Mason started walking toward him, loading another round. His breathing was heavy, uneven, like a man who'd waited years for this. Clara didn't think. She pushed the saloon doors open, stepped into the cold air, and raised the derringer with both hands. Her arms shook, but she kept the gun pointed straight. "Mason," she shouted. Her voice broke halfway through his name. He turned, surprised to see her there. "Go inside, girl. This ain't your fight." Her pulse hammered in her neck. "Leave him." Mason took another step forward. "You don't even know who he is." "I don't care." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Then you're making the same mistake he did." He started to lift his rifle again. Clara fired. The recoil jolted her wrist. The shot hit him in the shoulder, high, not fatal, but enough to drop him to one knee. Carter pushed himself up, pain twisting his face, and fired once more. The shot struck true. Mason fell backward and didn't move again. Silence returned. The horses in the distance whinnied nervously. The dust began to settle. Clara's hands still shook as she lowered the pistol. She looked down at Carter, breathing hard, one hand pressed against his side where blood darkened his shirt. She ran to him, kneeling beside him in the dirt. "You're hit." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not bad. Just hurts like hell. Let me help you inside." He nodded weakly, and she slipped her arm under his, guiding him back toward the saloon. Joe pushed the door open for them, face pale. "Get some clean cloths," Clara said sharply. Her voice surprised even herself, steady, controlled. As Joe hurried off, she looked back through the window. Mason's body lay motionless under the lantern light, dust swirling over him. She felt no triumph. Only a strange, heavy quiet. Carter leaned against the wall, watching her. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. She looked at him, eyes wet but firm. "You did it for me first." He didn't answer. The piano player struck a single, hesitant note in the corner, then stopped. Outside, the wind carried the last of the gun smoke away. The saloon was almost silent. Only the faint ticking of the wall clock and the low hiss of an oil lamp filled the air. Clara sat beside Carter, pressing a folded towel against his side. The blood had already soaked through. His breath came rough and uneven, his jaw tight as he tried to stay upright. Joe came back with a bottle of whiskey and a torn sheet. His hands trembled as he handed them over. "That's all I could find." "Good," Clara said. Her voice had lost the panic from before. Now it was focused, controlled. "Hold the light here." Joe lifted the lamp closer, casting yellow light across Carter's face. Sweat beaded on his forehead, streaking through the dust and dried blood. He looked at her, tired but steady. "You ever done this before?" he asked, voice low. She shook her head. "No. But I've cleaned worse cuts on horses." He gave a faint smile. "Guess I'm in good hands then." She didn't answer. Her fingers were shaking as she poured whiskey over the wound. Carter's body jerked. He grabbed the edge of the table hard enough to make it creak. "Sorry," she muttered. He took a slow breath, trying to control the pain. "Don't be. Just do what you have to." Outside, the street was quiet again, but the silence didn't feel safe. People were starting to whisper. Clara could hear muffled voices from across the road, doors opening, footsteps. The whole town would know by sunrise. Joe looked toward the window nervously. "They'll be coming soon. The deputy, maybe others." Carter's eyes opened halfway. "Let them come," he said. "I'm not hiding." Clara looked at him sharply. "You can barely stand. You can't fight them." "I don't need to fight," he replied. "But I'm not running anymore." She didn't understand it, this calm, this acceptance. It scared her more than the gunfight. "What? What are you proving?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to the blood-soaked towel, then back up to her face. "I'm tired of losing people because of the things I've done. Tonight, maybe it ends different." Her throat tightened. She pressed the towel harder, fighting the shake in her hands. "You think dying fixes that?" Before he could answer, there was a loud knock at the door. Joe froze. Clara stood, gun still in her hand though she didn't remember picking it up. A man's voice came from outside. "Sheriff's office. Open up." Clara looked back at Carter. His expression didn't change. "It's all right," he said softly. "No," she whispered. "They'll hang you for this." He shook his head. "Mason was wanted. They'll know soon enough. But they'll still ask questions. About me, about you." She hesitated. Her chest felt tight, her pulse fast. "Then tell them I shot him." That made him look up, startled. "Don't?" "Why not? You saved my life." He gave a slow, tired smile. "I don't need saving that way." The knock came again, harder this time. "Open the door or we're coming in." Joe looked between them, then at the door. Clara? She took a deep breath, lowered the gun, and nodded. Joe opened the door slowly. Two deputies stepped in, rifles in hand. One looked barely 20, the other middle-aged and grim-faced. They saw Carter right away, bloody, leaning on the table, revolver still in his holster. "Hands where I can see him," the older one said. Carter lifted his hands without a word. The younger deputy stepped closer, eyes flicking to Clara. "You the woman from the saloon?" She nodded. "He was defending me." The older one frowned. "We'll sort that out later." He gestured to Carter. "You're coming with us." Carter didn't resist. When he stood, his legs wavered but didn't give out. He glanced once at Clara, and something in that look, quiet, final, made her heart sink. "Wait," she said quickly. "He needs a doctor." "We'll send one," the deputy replied, already guiding him toward the door. Carter didn't look back again. He just let them lead him out into the cold night. Clara followed them to the doorway. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of gunpowder and smoke. Mason's body was still lying in the street, half covered by a tarp. The deputies put Carter on a horse, one of them holding the reins. He turned his head slightly when she called his name. "Carter." He met her eyes under the flickering lamplight. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "You did what you had to. Don't regret it." The words hit her harder than she expected. Before she could answer, they rode off, disappearing into the dark road that led to the edge of town. When the sound of hooves faded, Clara realized her hands were shaking again. Joe stood beside her, hat in hand, looking at the street like he couldn't believe what had just happened. "He won't make it far," Joe muttered. She turned to him sharply. "Don't say that." Joe nodded, lowering his eyes. "All right." She stayed there long after the others went back inside. The lamp above the saloon door flickered weakly, and the dust kept blowing down the empty street. Inside, the piano player started up again, slow, uncertain notes. Clara sat at one of the tables, staring at the towel still stained with his blood. Her mind replayed his last look, the calm in his eyes, the faint trace of a smile even as they took him away. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again. But somewhere deep down she already knew what kind of man he was. Not a drifter. Not a stranger. Someone who'd come for coffee and left her entire life changed.